In 2021, in a quiet digitization room above the Seine in Paris, a researcher scrolls through glass plate negatives from the Exposition Universelle of 1900. Domes rise and vanish on the screen, the palace of electricity, distant pavilions, temporary palaces of plaster and light. The captions repeat the same verdict: ephemeral, demolished, no longer extant. Yet the images tell another story. Under the magnifier, surfaces that should be soft and crude look like carved stone. Ribs, coffers, and lanterns repeating a geometry that appears again in old mosques, Renaissance cathedrals, railway termini, and civic halls on the other side of the world. Dust hangs in the projector beam. The only sound is the low hum of the scanner. One plate carries a faint pencil mark in the margin where a title should be. The label has been rubbed away, leaving only a halo of erased graphite. On the negative itself, a familiar silhouette cuts into the sky, a hemispherical dome crowned with a spike, ringed by smaller cupolas, stitched with early electric lamps that trace its curve like a constellation. Officially, it was a spectacle of modern engineering, built to impress for a single season and then cleared away. Visually, it is the twin of buildings raised centuries earlier in cities that never shared a blueprint or an architect. On another screen, a satellite view of a modern capital loads slowly. The same dome, the same lantern, now housing a parliament chamber. History remembers progress, but forgets what it replaced. The researcher leans closer, listening to the quiet electric buzz in the room. For a second, as the image refreshes, the old fairground dome and the present-day government dome align perfectly, one fading into the other. Then the screen flickers, and the archive returns to silence. Some patterns refuse to explain themselves. On a spring morning in 1874, a traveller enters the Pantheon in Rome. Guidebooks of that decade describe the structure as a marvel of Roman concrete, inviting visitors to stand beneath its vast hemisphere. The official story is simple. Completed under the Emperor Hadrian around 125 CE, the dome remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. Guides explain the gradation of aggregate, from heavy basalt at the base to volcanic pumice near the crown, a rational solution to weight and stress that engineers still study today. Inside, voices rise and are swallowed again. The floor is cool, a shaft of light falls through the oculus, slowly sliding across marble circles and bronze grills. The building has served as temple, church, and tomb across nearly 2 millennia. Rainwater drains invisibly through channels cut into the ancient floor, a detail noted by 19th century architects who marvelled at Roman engineering. In the archives, the dates are consistent: ancient structure, continuous use, gradual repair. The mystery is interpretive, not documentary. Why did this particular form, a hemisphere over a circle, become the template for sacred and civic space across continents? The Pantheon's proportions would reappear in Renaissance Florence, in Ottoman Istanbul, in capitals built centuries later by cultures that claim to design from scratch. The sound here is simple, the soft echo of footsteps on stone, the way a whisper travels and then dissolves. Modern acoustic engineers treat the Pantheon as a case study in reverberation. For those who sense deeper patterns, its proportions recall later domes in distant cities. Outside, traffic hums. Inside, the air feels cooler, almost electrically still. The oculus frames the sky like a lens, a circle between earth and heavens that later ages would keep repeating, even when they claimed originality. By 1850, European engravings of Hagia Sophia circulate widely. Official guidebooks present it as a triumph of Byzantine architecture, consecrated in 537 CE under Emperor Justinian, converted to a mosque after 1453, and supported by centuries of buttressing and repair. The structure's main dome floats on a ring of 40 windows, the load eased by semi-domes and massive piers, an engineering solution that astonished the medieval world and continues to puzzle modern analysts. Ottoman records describe repairs after earthquakes. The dome partially collapsed in 558 and was rebuilt higher. Buttresses were added over subsequent centuries to stabilize the structure. Nothing in the surviving documents suggests hidden technology. The focus in official accounts is on piety, empire, and the challenge of spanning so much space without collapse. Yet travellers' accounts from the mid-19th century often remark on its sound. A muezzin's call, they noted, hangs in the air for several heartbeats. A single spoken word returns as a soft, layered murmur. These reactions appear in general terms, not as scientific measurements, but they echo a recurring motif across dome architecture, the hemisphere as instrument, not just shelter. On a cloudy afternoon in 1850, filtered light seeps through high windows, catches in dust, and reveals faint gold mosaics beneath a later plaster. Restorers' signatures remain scratched into stones on upper galleries, human traces in the margins of imperial grandeur. The dates align: construction in the 6th century, reinforcements after earthquakes. Official history is internally consistent. The unease comes from visual comparison. The outline of Hagia Sophia's dome reappears, with variations, in cities from Moscow to Washington centuries later. If each age solved its structural problems independently, why did they arrive at almost the same profile, the same lantern, the same acoustic cup? By late 1865, the cast-iron dome of the United States Capitol stands essentially complete, towering above Washington. Official reports describe it as a symbol of union and progress after the Civil War. Iron ribs, inner and outer shells, crowned by Thomas Crawford's bronze Statue of Freedom. Architects openly reference earlier European precedents. Brunelleschi's dome over Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence, completed in 1436, is cited among the inspirations. In Florence, Brunelleschi had solved a puzzle that had defeated builders for decades: how to span the cathedral's wide crossing without traditional timber centering. His double-shell brick dome, with its herringbone pattern and internal ribs, remains a landmark in structural engineering. In Washington, Thomas U. Walter used iron instead of brick, but the geometry stayed familiar: a raised drum, a layered shell, a lantern as crown. 19th century visitors noted how voices under the Capitol dome carried unnaturally well during debates, every syllable amplified and blurred. The acoustics were criticized as too echoing for clear speech, a complaint that would recur in domed legislative chambers worldwide. The archival record shows minor discrepancies. Early photographs sometimes mislabel stages of construction, placing certain scaffolding scenes a year or two before or after written reports. These are the normal ambiguities that archivists correct with cautionary footnotes. What persists is a deeper pattern. A government chooses a dome, not a flat roof or a tower, to house its central chamber. In Florence, the dome shelters liturgy. In Washington, legislation. Feelings of reverence and authority, once reserved for the divine, migrate into secular power. From above, both domes read as circles inscribed on the city grid, collecting sound, attention, and meaning into a single focal point. By 1890, St. Paul's Cathedral's Whispering Gallery has become a tourist attraction. Guidebooks of the period explain the physics: a circular gallery beneath the dome that carries faint sounds along its curved surface. For visitors climbing the damp stone steps that year, the air grows cooler as they ascend. Reaching the gallery, they test the claim. One person whispers against the wall, another, far away, hears the words clearly. The documented explanation relies on known acoustics, sound waves hugging the curved masonry. Early popular science articles use St. Paul's as a familiar example of this phenomenon, later formalized mathematically by Lord Rayleigh and others. In the cathedral's own records, the feature is described without mysticism. It is a curiosity, an unintended consequence of Christopher Wren's geometry. Yet to those who have visited domed mosques in Istanbul, basilicas in Rome, and smaller civic halls across Europe, the effect feels strangely familiar, the same low-frequency resonance, the same lingering echo. Acoustic engineers in the late 19th century begin to measure reverberation times. St. Paul's becomes one of several case studies. Their notes confirm that domes exaggerate certain frequencies and suppress others. There is no archival contradiction in the dates. St. Paul's dome was completed in 1710. The whispering effect was noticed and reported soon after. The tension lies elsewhere, in the repetition of similar acoustic oddities wherever large domes rise, whether or not designers claim to calculate them. Outside, London rain taps on stone. Inside, under the dome, there is a sense of being enclosed within an ear. A visitor in 1890 might hear a distant carriage rumble, transformed into something like thunder. The dome keeps appearing wherever humans need to gather sound and attention into one place. In the summer of 1893, the World's Columbian Exposition opens on the shores of Lake Michigan. The official narrative is triumphalist. The White City showcases American industry and neoclassical design. Most buildings are clad in staff, a mix of plight, cement, and jute fibre, intended to last only for the fair's duration. Newspapers and guidebooks state plainly, these palaces will not endure. Photographs from that summer tell a different visual story. Under strong Midwestern sunlight, the domes and colonnades appear solid, almost stone-like. The great manufactures and liberal arts building, designed by George B. Post and covering over 30 acres, featured arched trusses and a vast interior space. Other pavilions crowned with cupolas, echo Roman basilicas, and Renaissance churches. Visitors reported being overwhelmed by the scale, describing how the structures rose over artificial lagoons like a dream of antiquity rebuilt in the New World. The archival record is largely consistent. Engineering journals describe steel framing and lightweight cladding. After the fair, most structures were demolished or destroyed by fire. The Palace of Fine Arts alone survived in adapted form, eventually becoming the Museum of Science and Industry. Yet there are small puzzles. Photographs catalogued decades later sometimes carry only vague dates, their captions conflicting about which building is which, as similar dome profiles repeated across the fairgrounds. Visitors' accounts mention band concerts under these temporary domes. Music swelled and rolled in ways that seemed disproportionate to the plaster and fibre supposedly overhead. Whether this was poetic exaggeration or genuine acoustic effect cannot now be measured. The air was hot that summer, the glare intense, reflections from water doubling the white hemispheres. The fair closed, the buildings vanished, only photographs remain, showing a brief reappearance of an ancient architectural language that official reports dismissed as temporary fashion. By night in 1900, the Exposition Universelle in Paris glows with electric light. Official accounts celebrate the new century. Incandescent filaments, moving sidewalks, iron trusses spanning vast halls. The Grand Palais and Petit Palais, with their glass roofs and stone facades, are built to endure. Other dome structures are explicitly described as provisional, meant to impress for a season and then disappear. Film footage and photographs from that summer show a forest of domes. Glass vaults over machinery halls, plaster cupolas above national pavilions, iron frame roofs painted to resemble stone. Exhibition catalogues list these buildings by function rather than geometry, yet when later archivists arrange the images by skyline, an uncanny repetition emerges. The silhouettes could be rearranged into another city entirely, and still feel architecturally coherent. In the archives, the dates align, construction rushed before opening day, dismantling or reuse afterward. Minor inconsistencies in captions are typical of large events, a dome misidentified as belonging to one pavilion when plans show it on another. These errors are corrected in later scholarship. Nothing suggests deliberate concealment. The anomaly is subtler. Visitors in 1900 were told to see novelty, yet the forms drew deeply on centuries of domed sacred and civic architecture. A visitor standing on the Pont Alexandre III might have looked across the river at exhibition domes. The dome of Les Invalides, the distant silhouette of the Pantheon, lined up like instruments awaiting a conductor. The sound that year was the hum of generators, the buzz of early arc lamps, the murmur of international crowds. Reports mention the strange quality of the night air, lit yet hazy, dust and steam catching the electric glow. In that haze, domes appeared and disappeared like thoughts half remembered. The fair ended, the temporary structures came down. The pattern remained. On a winter day in 1913, frost hangs in the air above Moscow. Photographs taken from high vantage points show onion domes of Orthodox churches clustered alongside more recent structures. Western-influenced domes on banks, museums, and government buildings. Architectural histories of the period describe this mixture as eclecticism, Russian forms mingling with Renaissance and Baroque, imports brought by foreign architects in earlier centuries. The records are mostly coherent. Architects and patrons are named. Influences are openly cited. Italian masters had worked in Moscow since the 15th century. French and German engineers contributed to 19th century construction. Yet when one compares section drawings of these newer domes with those of distant capitals and courthouses, in North America, in British India, in continental Europe, similar proportional relationships repeat. The ratio of drum height to dome radius falls within narrow ranges. Lanterns and finials focus the silhouette in consistent ways. Foreign visitors in the 1910s sometimes wrote of feeling an odd familiarity despite never having seen Russia before. The skyline, one English traveller remarked in general terms, reminded him of Rome and of no place in particular simultaneously. This is not evidence of conspiracy. It is evidence of a shared architectural vocabulary that transcends politics and geography. Snow muffles the city's sound that winter morning. Church bells, however, travel cleanly under the dome-filled sky, their overtones interacting in complex acoustic patterns. Modern software can model such interference. Earlier observers simply described it as a chorus or a metallic sea. There is no clear archival contradiction about construction dates. What remains unexplained is the speed of the pattern spread. Within a few decades from the late 19th to early 20th century, domed public buildings rose in cities linked by rail and telegraph, a synchronization that official history attributes to fashion. though the skylines suggest something more systematic. In the late 1890s, Wallace Clement Sabine, a young physicist at Harvard, begins a series of experiments that will define modern architectural acoustics. Working in lecture halls and performance spaces, some with domed or vaulted ceilings, he times how long it takes for sound to decay to inaudibility. His measurements, conducted with organ pipes and a stopwatch in darkened rooms, lead to formulas relating volume, surface area, and absorption, the foundation of acoustic engineering. Contemporary accounts describe his frustration with overly reverberant halls where speech blurs into unintelligible noise. The new Fogg Art Museum lecture hall at Harvard had been declared a failure. Sabine was asked to fix it. He responded by adding absorptive materials, testing each modification, building a quantitative science from what had been intuition and craft. Domes, in Sabine's framework, are not mystical objects. They are surfaces that either help or hinder acoustic clarity, depending on their shape, size, and the materials that line them. His laboratory notes and subsequent publications are straightforward in their dates and methods. There is no secrecy, only the slow emergence of a new discipline. Yet behind the formulas lies a tacit acknowledgement. For centuries, builders had produced specific acoustic effects without this mathematics. Cathedral architects, mosque designers, and theatre builders relied on tradition, proportion, and accumulated trial. When later researchers applied Sabine's reverberation equations backward, calculating the acoustic properties of ancient domed spaces, the results often landed close to ideal ranges for chant and speech. The sound motif here is the measured decay of a handclap, the lingering chord of a pipe organ in an empty hall. Whether the alignment between ancient intuition and modern measurement represents coincidence, accumulated craft, or evidence of deliberate acoustic design remains something the documents cannot decide. At the start of the 20th century, inventors dream of using the atmosphere itself as a medium for power and communication. In 1901, on Long Island, Nikola Tesla begins construction of Wardenclyffe Tower, designed for wireless telegraphy, and, according to Tesla's more ambitious claims, the transmission of electrical power without wires. The tower's most distinctive feature is its large mushroom-shaped cupola, a conductive terminal intended to interact with the Earth's electrical field. Engineering journals of the period debate feasibility. J.P. Morgan provides initial funding. When commercial wireless telegraphy proves viable through simpler means, the funding dries up. The tower is never completed to Tesla's specifications. In 1917, it is demolished, its lumber sold to pay debts. Photographs survive showing the distinctive dome-like terminal against the Long Island sky. What connects this scene to the broader history of domes is not a secret blueprint, but a visual rhyme. Long before Wardenclyffe, dome churches and capitals had been crowned with metal finials and crosses, often connected to internal ironwork. After Benjamin Franklin demonstrated the lightning rod in the mid-18th century, many of these finials were explicitly bonded to ground for protection against strikes. The speculative interpretation emerges later in our own century. Some alternative researchers look at historic skylines, domes capped with metal points, arrayed along hills and waterways, and see not just ornament or safety devices, but a loose network of atmospheric interfaces. Official history calls them decorative elements and practical protection. The alternative reading sees possible resonators and collectors, tuned by geometry and height. On stormy evenings, thunder rolls over city domes, while telegraph wires vibrate in the wind. The physics of atmospheric electricity is well understood. What earlier builders thought about such forces, if they thought about them at all, remains undocumented. By the early 20th century, domes have migrated into industrial districts. Gas holders, cylindrical tanks storing coal gas for urban lighting and heating, often feature gently curved tops to manage internal pressure and structural loads. Power stations use vaulted or dome roofs to span turbine halls without internal columns. Engineering texts document these choices with stress calculations and material specifications. On a foggy morning around 1905, a photographer captures a gasworks complex somewhere in industrial Europe. A row of cylindrical tanks, one with a rounded cap, chimneys rising behind. In the distance, through the haze, church domes and civic buildings punctuate the skyline. The archive labels such images simply gasworks, circa 1905, often without precise location or date. The official reasoning for these industrial forms is utilitarian. Curved surfaces distribute force evenly, reducing material requirements. Domes and vaults shed rain and snow efficiently. Industrial structures rarely receive the symbolic language granted to religious or civic buildings, yet structurally they share the same geometric logic. They enclose, they withstand, they manage invisible pressures, whether of prayer, legislation, or combustible fuel. Workers' testimonies, preserved in oral histories and factory reports, mention the sound inside such structures, the thrum of engines overwhelming speech, the way certain frequencies seem to make the roof itself vibrate, whether the curved ceiling amplifies or merely reflects these vibrations is an engineering question. For those who worked inside, the experience was physical, felt in the chest. Today, some of these gasometers have been converted into housing, offices, or concert venues. The industrial dome passes into the cultural realm, another iteration of the pattern. The same geometry that once held pressurized gas now holds audiences and performances, while the original engineering diagrams sit quietly in technical archives, their purposes transformed but their shapes preserved. Imagine a cartographer in 1910, working in a European planning office, tracing city maps onto transparent overlays. His task is administrative. Compare street networks, update property boundaries, mark infrastructure. As he layers plans of Vienna, Rome, Washington, Calcutta, and other capitals, certain marks keep appearing, circles indicating domed buildings, cathedrals, museums, legislative chambers, railway termini. The official purposes for these domes differ, but their placement follows similar logic. At geometric centres, on elevated ground, near river crossings and major intersections. Urban planning literature of the period emphasises monumentality and sightlines. Domes create recognisable landmarks visible from multiple approaches, orienting citizens and visitors alike. The records are mundane, construction dates are documented, building functions are clear. There is no secret correspondence linking distant cities. Yet when modern researchers overlay city layouts digitally, they notice patterns that our imaginary cartographer might have glimpsed in 2 dimensions. A loose global constellation of hemispheres, rising at similar historical moments between the mid-19th and early 20th centuries. Just as railways and telegraph lines wove the world together, the sound in this chapter is abstracted. Church bells in one city, factory whistles in another, parliamentary debates in a third, all radiating from beneath domes at appointed hours, structuring daily rhythms across time zones. The environmental detail is mundane. Thin dust on the map table, the scratch of pen on tracing paper, morning light through office windows. Speculative interpreters suggest these domes form an architectural grid, a network of resonant centres. Official urban history describes them as monuments of nation building and imperial ambition. The verifiable data are positions, dimensions, and dates. What we make of the repetition remains an open question that the archive poses but does not answer. After the World Wars, many domed buildings lie in ruins. Some are painstakingly restored using surviving plans. Others are demolished and replaced with flat-roof modernist structures. In archives across Europe, curators sort through boxes of charred drawings and water-damaged photographs, deciding what to preserve. The reasons for loss are documented: bombing damage, structural instability, change in architectural tastes, new functional demands. Reports list domes beyond repair, recommend replacement with simpler roofs. In some cases, destruction is photographed. In others, only brief administrative notes remain. The contradiction, where it exists, is not in dates but in priorities. A dome that once defined a neighbourhood can disappear into a line item. Meanwhile, the nearby cathedral or Parliament dome is rebuilt at enormous cost, the profile preserved like a civic logo. Human traces surface in marginalia. A restorer's signature at the bottom of a reconstruction drawing. A note in city council minutes praising the re-emergence of a familiar skyline. The sound motif is absence, the quiet where a bell tower once rang, the changed acoustics when a vast curved roof no longer reflects urban noise. For researchers seeking to understand the pattern, the post-war decades are difficult terrain. Many original drawings were destroyed, photographs survive with vague captions, in seeing which domes were rebuilt at any cost and which were allowed to vanish. We glimpse a hierarchy of meaning that official records rarely articulate. On a clear evening in 2024, drone footage of a European capital shows what tourists see daily without comment: a skyline punctuated by domes. Cathedral, Parliament, museum, converted gasometer, all marked by hemispheres catching the last light. Official guide apps describe them in familiar terms: iconic, historic, Baroque, neoclassical, industrial heritage. Acoustic consultants tune interiors with software, adding panels inside those same shells. Lightning protection systems link metallic crowns to buried grounding rods. Satellites pass overhead, indifferent to the architecture below. The archive for this moment is live and digital. Floor plans exist in municipal databases. Building histories fill scanned books. Dates are precise. Errors are quickly corrected. More is documented than ever before. And yet a simple question remains: why did so many cultures, across so many centuries, choose roughly the same form to mark their centres of power, worship, and energy? Structural efficiency explains part of it. Symbolism accounts for another part. The rest lies in lived experience, the way sound gathers, light falls, and a curved shell makes enclosed space feel like a world unto itself. The closing sound is low, almost inaudible. Traffic, ventilation, distant bells. The evening air cools. Lights flicker on inside domes as sky darkens. Some see in this global repetition the fossil of forgotten knowledge, a resonance-based architecture whose purposes are records no longer fully described. Official history names styles and dates without confirming or denying deeper patterns. The camera pulls back. Domes shrink to points on a glowing map. The image ends mid-frame, just as city lights form a pattern that looks almost intentional. Whether it is only our pattern-seeking minds or the faint memory of an erased design, the archive cannot say, but the skyline keeps asking.